Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Prudence Gibson. I am an academic here in Sydney at the University of New South Wales. My area of study and research interest is environmental aesthetics. And within that area of study, I work in the area of critical plant studies. So I have several books published on these topics, and the most recent is called The Plant Contract 2018 with Brill, which is really about how the argument is how arts and narrative can mediate really difficult, complex problems about climate change and massive extinctions by talking about artwork and narrative that engages with plant life as a means of broaching quite difficult subjects. And for me, the idea was one plant, one person. If we could just have one contract per person that we stick to, then maybe we'll move towards some better thinking and better philosophy and better art making and better writing. And I also have at the moment in Australia, we have a grant scheme called the Australian Research Council Linkage Grants. And I have one of those grants, and the point of the grants is to partner for academics, to partner with industry to solve some kind of research problem. And so I've partnered with the Royal Botanical Gardens Herbarium, and we work together to try and work out ways to use art and narrative to revalue the plants in the herbarium collection. And so that I'm going to talk today about the idea of valuing plants, like what kind of plant values are we talking about? For instance, the herbarium has 1.4 million specimens in its collection, which are worth $280 million. Now, is the value of plants supposed to be economic? Is it supposed to be a financial value that we're adding to that kind of understanding of plant life? Or is the value more about how the collection is used? Is it about a research value? Is it about a social value, cultural value? Is it about botanical restoration, conservation value? Or is the value more in the way we learn more about ourselves being humans if we work with non-human beings as well? So there's a really kind of rich area for thinking about what valuing a collection might mean. So, I've come to talk to you today partly because of my work with herbarium plants, and also because of my work up until now, working with such scientists such as Monica Gagliano, who's done a lot of work about plant behavior and plant communication and plant sentience. And she's done, all the laboratory hard yards, really proving what we intuitively and instinctively already understood about plant life, which is that they make decisions and they are capable of really complex communication via emitting chemicals and gases. And that, of course, through Monica's work, we now know that they can learn and remember. And so these kinds of complex behaviors in plant life, many of us instinctively and intuitively understood just from spending a lot of time with plants and touching plants and growing plants and talking to plants and lying down with plants and trying to remember the names of plants. So, this is the kind of relationship that I'm hoping to encourage amongst all humans, is to spend more time with plant life and the vegetal world of thinking and thought. So, to start talking a little bit about the herbarium here in Sydney is a really interesting institution. The whole really interesting point about Australia is that we are a colonized country. So, in the late 18th century, Britain came to Australia. The land was not ceded by First Nations people, so we think of it as an invasion. And the consequences of that timing is very particular to the continent of Australia, because many people think of the Anthropocene as starting at the point at which human activity started to affect the sort of deep layers of time on a particular given area of land. And for Australia, we had First Nations people living here for 40,000 and more years, and the damage that has been done to the landscape has coincided with colonization. So over the last 230 odd years, most of the damage to the landscape has occurred. So I think that that's a really important and very specific characteristic of Australia, and worth noting, particularly in terms of our history, our colonial history. So the beauty of the herbarium is that it's such a glorious place. Many of us love archives, and of course, if you love plants and archives, then the herbarium is a joyful place to be, with the millions and millions of specimens, all those drawers and all those specimen papers, which are rich with data and information about how the plant was collected, where it was collected, the specific information and characteristics of the plants collected. But of course, what comes with that sort of data and body of information is a lot of errors and a lot of colonial mistakes. And the whole idea of taxonomy and classification and ordering and naming, the nomenclature of plant life is really interesting as well, because plants, don't exist unless they've been named in terms of a herbarium collection. So that's a really interesting point to make. So if we are going to decolonize a plant collection or a botanical garden or plants themselves, how do we address those issues where naming and language and text is so critical to what has been done? And so what I am working towards is working again using arts and narrative, which is what I particularly am interested in doing, to not only revalue the plants in the collection, but to start to think about decolonizing practices, not just in terms of the staff of the herbarium at all, and not to think about decolonizing as a way of returning to some kind of epoch of time where everything was better prior to invasion, because you can't turn back the clock. But we can start thinking about processes and methodologies and ways of thinking that are contemporary, that refer to the past and also the future at the same time. And so I'm thinking about, a way forward that involves counter narratives. And of course, that means not destroying the narratives that exist in terms of the herbarium history and collection, because it's rich and fulsome, and it's really important in terms of us understanding what the landscapes in Australia were like pre-colonization, pre-Anthropocene. So the project that I'm looking forward to next is not necessarily about anything other than decolonizing as an act of being de-anthropocentric and being de-Eurocentric, and starting to think more in terms of having some kind of ecocentric attitude or approach to the methodologies that we understand. And so that means looking at the past, thinking about the future, but acting very, very tangibly in the present. So I'm just going to sign off by saying that in addition to working with the herbarium and confessing to be an absolute addict of plants, and being also an addict of archives and collections, is that I'm also a member of a Dirt Witches organisation, which is a group of 60+ women here in Sydney, and we are eco-activists, environmental activists, and we've just built a Banksia Street forest in the middle of the city here in the CBD, and that is related to an Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub, which is an endangered scrub. So it's not just about one Banksia tree, it's about a whole ecosystem of Banksia scrub that used to run along 5,000 hectares of land here in Sydney, around Sydney, north and south of Sydney. And so I just want to raise awareness for those kinds of processes as well, like rewilding the city, as well as working with plants in the herbarium. I really feel strongly that there are so many ways that we can work to revalue plants together. And I feel like this community, being with plants, is a really rich and fertile place to share our ideas together. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody else in the symposium. So thanks very much for your time.